The barn smelled of sweat, dust, and desperation, and Annabeth stood trembling beneath a crooked sign that read, "Unclaimed Brides, Auction Ends at Noon." Her dress was borrowed, yellowed with age, sleeves too short to hide the bruises on her arms, and the bonnet on her head was the only thing she had left from her mother, who died before ever teaching her what it meant to be touched by a man. She was 19, untouched, unschooled in love, and sold like livestock because her uncle drank away the mortgage. The crowd was mostly ranch hands and gamblers, but one man stood apart, silent in a dark hat, arms crossed over a long coat, eyes unreadable under the brim. He looked like a man who'd buried too many things to still believe in redemption. "A virgin!" the auctioneer barked, lifting Annabeth's chin with the curve of his knuckle. "Not a mark on her except those you can't see," he added with a laugh that made the front row hoot. "Starting at $3. Don't be shy, gents." Someone snorted. Someone else offered $2. Then $3 rang out like a gunshot from the back. Everyone turned. The man in the hat stepped forward, counted $3 silver into the auctioneer's palm, then turned to Annabeth and said, "Nothing. Not a word. Not even a claim." He didn't grab her or drag her away like the others had done to the other girls. He walked to the dirt floor and slowly, impossibly, kneeled in front of her. A cowboy, on his knees. The barn fell into a hush. Annabeth's breath hitched, then cracked, then escaped her throat in a scream, not from pain, not even fear, but from something too large to name. The moment splintered the air like glass, and the cowboy didn't flinch. He reached up, not to undress her, not to mark her, but to untie the fraying laces of her dust-caked shoes. His fingers brushed her ankles with the reverence of a prayer. "You don't belong to me," he said, so only she could hear. "I just paid so no one else could hurt you." Her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. She stared at him like he'd walked out of a storybook no one dared to write anymore. "Why?" she whispered, but he didn't answer. He rose, placed her shoes gently on the edge of the platform, and handed her his coat. Then he turned, nodding at the auctioneer once, and walked toward the door. Annabeth didn't move. The whole barn watched her, waiting for the catch, for the punishment, for the real reason he'd knelt. But all she could do was clutch the coat, her scream still echoing off the rafters like the ghost of a girl who thought she'd be broken, but was somehow made sacred instead. Annabeth didn't speak the entire wagon ride. The cowboy said nothing either. He didn't touch her, didn't even look at her except once, when she flinched at the crack of the reins, and he gently slowed the horses without a word. The coat he'd draped around her shoulders still smelled of pine and leather. Worn, but warm, and she gripped it like it might disappear if she breathed too hard. She expected the cabin to be a shack, or worse, a place built for sin with locks on the inside. But when they arrived, she saw something that didn't match the fear she'd memorized. The place was neat, stacked high with firewood, with curtains in the windows and steam curling from the chimney. The porch creaked under her boots, but no hands pushed her forward. He opened the door, stepped aside, and let her choose. "You're free to walk," he said, "but if you need heat, food, or quiet, it's inside." She hesitated, then entered. The warmth hit her like a lullaby she didn't trust. There were blankets folded on chairs, shelves lined with worn books, and a kettle humming over the fire. On the table, 2 plates waited. Plain stew, nothing fancy, but enough to feel like a kindness that might be poisoned. She didn't sit. "What now?" she asked, voice frayed. "You wait," he said, "until you're hungry." Then he crossed the room and picked up a piece of carved wood from the mantel, an eagle in mid-flight. His hands turned it gently, like it held stories too fragile to speak aloud. "Why did you kneel?" she asked. He looked at her. "Because every man stood over you today, and not one of them saw you." She sat down slowly, body still rigid, hands clenched in her lap. "You paid for me." "I paid so no one else could." He handed her a spoon and sat across the table without lifting his. "Eat," he said. "If you want, or don't. You're not a thing I bought. You're a person I saw." Tears welled, unexpected. Her first bite scalded her tongue, and she let it. It was real, hot, heavy, alive. "What's your name?" she whispered. "Corbin," he said. "And yours?" She almost didn't answer. Then, "Annabeth." He nodded. "That's a name worth saying." Outside, snow began to fall in soft, slow flakes. Inside, the cabin held something she hadn't felt in years: space without pressure, warmth without demand. A man across from her who didn't look at her like she owed him something. Just Corbin. Just quiet. Just breathe. She woke to the scent of coffee and something baking. Biscuits, maybe, or cornbread. And for a long moment, Annabeth thought she'd dreamed the entire auction. But her fingers curled against a wool blanket, not her own, and the fire crackled steadily from a hearth she'd never dared imagine. She sat up slowly, still wrapped in Corbin's coat, still clothed, still untouched. And that was the first shock, that nothing had happened. No bruises, no stains, just warmth. When she stepped into the small kitchen corner of the cabin, Corbin was turning a skillet, calm as sunrise, his shirt rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms nicked with old scars and flour dust. "Coffee?" he asked without looking up. "Yes," she said, voice raspier than she expected. He poured her a tin cup and slid it across the counter. No command, no pressure, just offering. She didn't drink it right away. She stared at the steam like it might spell out the rules of this strange new world. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. He met her eyes. "Doing what?" "Treating me like—" She searched for the word. He waited. "Like I'm someone," she said. "You are." Her lip trembled, and she nearly spilled the cup. He came around the counter, not fast, not looming, just steady, and held her wrist gently until she steadied. "May I braid your hair?" he asked. The question hit her like a hymn. Her mouth opened, closed. She nodded. "You may." He brought a stool near the hearth and guided her to sit. She obeyed, half in shock, half in awe. As he combed his fingers through her hair, starting slow, untangling without tugging, she realized something terrifying. No man had ever touched her without taking. Corbin didn't take. He gave. Each strand he worked through felt like a prayer he wasn't saying out loud. "My mother used to braid mine," she whispered, "before she died." He nodded but didn't ask. "Men don't do this," she said. "They don't kneel. They don't braid. They take." Corbin's fingers paused at the base of her neck. "Then they were never men," he said. "Just cowards hiding behind muscle." When he finished, he tied the braid with a thin leather cord, then stepped back like he'd just mended something holy. She turned to face him, unsure what to say. He just looked at her, steady and quiet. "Do you feel human yet?" he asked. She swallowed. "More than I ever did at home." "Then we're getting somewhere," he said. And he smiled, not like a man who wanted her, but like a man who saw her. The braid stayed, even when she slept, as though undoing it might undo the peace that had settled over her bones. By the next morning, Annabeth had washed the dust from her skin in the stream behind the cabin, drying off behind a patchwork curtain Corbin had hung after leaving a clean dress on a rock nearby. It didn't fit perfectly. It wasn't made for her, but it wasn't ragged either. That alone made her pause. By the time she stepped back inside, cheeks still pink from the cold, Corbin had finished mending a loose shutter, his breath fogging in the morning air. "You didn't have to leave the dress," she said. "You didn't have to wear it," he replied, smiling slightly. She bit her lip, then asked the question that had burned through her for 2 days. "What do you want from me?" Corbin leaned the hammer against the wall and took a moment before answering. "I want quiet mornings and the smell of coffee," he said, "and the sound of someone else breathing in this place who doesn't flinch at every board that creaks." "That's all?" she asked. "That's everything," he said. "But I paid," she said, voice low. $3. That's what a man pays for—" "A body," he interrupted gently. "If that's what I wanted, I wouldn't have outbid the drunkard who grabbed your ankle." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't know what to do with a man like you." "Just don't run," he said. "That'll be enough." That evening, after stew and silence and the quiet scratch of Corbin's pencil as he sketched something in a book, Annabeth did the unthinkable. She sat beside him. Not at the hearth, not across the room, but beside him, shoulder to shoulder, their legs almost touching. "My mother used to sew quilts," she offered softly. "Said every scrap of cloth held a memory." "What happened to her?" he asked. "She died when I was 13. After that it was just Pa, and he didn't like memories much." "Is he the one who sold you?" "No," she said. "He died too. My uncle sold me. Said I ate too much and smiled too little." Corbin didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply reached out, took her hand, and held it between both of his like something fragile and warming. She didn't pull away. "You braid my hair," she whispered, "but you won't even touch me." "That," he said, "is the first touch that matters, the one that waits." Her throat caught. "How long would you wait?" "As long as it takes for you to believe you're worth more than $3. For the first time in her life, she believed someone meant it. The next morning, Annabeth woke to the scent of cornbread rising in a cast-iron pan. Not smoke, not liquor, not leather belts on wood floors. Just bread. Soft, warm, sweet at the edges. She blinked at the unfamiliar safety and sat up slowly, half expecting it to vanish if she moved too quickly. Corbin wasn't inside the cabin. A note had been left on the table, the handwriting rough but clear. "Went to the creek for water. Stay in, fire's already lit. Bread's for you." She touched the edge of the note like it might burn her, then brought the plate to her lap and stared at the golden wedge he'd baked. It was perfect. Too perfect. She took a bite anyway. When he returned, she was still sitting in the same place, crumbs in her lap, eyes shining. "I thought I'd be locked in," she said quietly. "Why?" he asked. "Because kindness like this usually costs something later." Corbin leaned his back against the doorframe and said nothing for a while. "I don't know what they did to you," he finally said. "But it wasn't right. And it doesn't get to decide how I treat you now." She looked down. "Then why did you buy me?" "Because they were going to give you to a man who spat in your face." Her fingers trembled. "You knew I was a virgin." "That's what they said. I didn't need to know." "But every man wanted that. That's why they raised the price." "I raised the price so no one else could." He walked over, crouched beside her, and handed her a cup of water. "You were starving. You were shivering. You looked like a bird someone had stripped the feathers from just to watch it suffer." Her eyes met his. "And now?" "Now you look like a woman trying to decide if the door is open or just unlocked." She held his gaze for too long. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached into her braid, loosened one strand, and placed it across the bread plate. "That's all I've ever owned," she said. "A braid I made to feel less like a thing." Corbin didn't touch it. He only nodded. "I'll keep it safe, until you want it back." That night, she set her plate beside his at the table. They didn't say grace, but as she passed him the stew, her fingers brushed his, and it felt, just for a second, like she'd said thank you without speaking. And he'd heard it all. After dinner, Annabeth lingered near the fire, uncertain if she was supposed to clear the dishes, ask permission to sleep, or simply vanish into the shadows. Corbin had gone quiet again, rocking slowly in the old wooden chair near the hearth. The crackle of the logs filled the silence between them. When she finally gathered the courage, she asked in a hushed voice, "What do you want from me?" His chair creaked to a stop. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, without looking at her, he stood, walked to the corner, and picked up a simple broom. He held it out gently, not as a command, but like a peace offering. "Just a clean floor," he said. "If you feel like it." She stared at the broom, confused. "Not the bed?" His jaw tensed. "Not the bed. Not your body. Not your silence. I don't want to own you. Just live alongside you for a while, if that's what you want too." Her throat tightened. She took the broom like it was made of glass, then moved to the far wall and began sweeping slowly. Not to earn her keep, but to claim the space. Each stroke felt like she was brushing away what had been done to her. The years, the shame, the bruises no one had ever touched with kindness. When she reached the door, Corbin stepped aside, watching her, not inspecting. She finally turned to him. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at the fire. "Because I know what it's like to be sold for something you never agreed to." Her breath caught. "You?" He nodded slowly. "Not as a bride, but as a boy. My father traded me for 3 horses when I was 11. The man who got me didn't need a son. He needed someone to beat." The silence between them shifted, no longer empty, but thick with shared ache. She set the broom down and crossed to the table, her hands resting on the back of a chair. "Then we're both something bought," she said, "but I don't want to stay that way." Corbin met her gaze. "Then don't." She hesitated. "Can I sleep by the fire tonight?" "Of course," he said. "But the bed's yours too, if you ever want warmth without worry." She nodded and curled into the blanket, beside the hearth. Before she drifted off, she whispered so softly he almost missed it. "Thank you for asking nothing. It means everything." Morning sunlight spilled through the warped window panes as Annabeth stirred beneath the patched quilt. The scent of coffee, wood smoke, and something sweet filled the air. She sat up slowly, unsure if the warmth in her bones came from the fire or the fact that no one had touched her without consent. Corbin wasn't in the room. But there, draped neatly over a chair by the hearth, was her wedding dress, cleaned, dried, and folded with impossible care. Her breath caught. The hem, once stained with mud and soot, now held a faint scent of pine soap. Someone had washed it by hand. She reached for it, her fingers trembling as she lifted the fabric. She hadn't worn it by choice. It had been strapped on her like armor before the auction, a symbol of shame wrapped in lace. But now, it sat like something reclaimed. When Corbin stepped in with a sack of flour over his shoulder, he paused at the sight of her holding it. "Didn't mean to assume," he said quietly, "but it didn't seem right to leave it dirty." She couldn't speak. She simply nodded, eyes burning. "There's biscuits if you want them," he added, placing the sack gently down. "And some honey I bartered off the trapper last spring." She folded the dress carefully and laid it on the bed. "Why are you so kind to me?" He shrugged. Because you were sold doesn't mean you're property. You're still someone. Her voice cracked. No one ever made me feel like someone. Corbin moved to the stove and stirred a pot. Well, you're here now. That counts for something. She approached the table and sat across from him. When I first saw you, she whispered, I thought you'd hurt me like the rest. He nodded solemnly. I figured. But you didn't. Didn't see a reason to. She picked up her biscuit and broke it in half, letting the steam curl into her face. What if I wanted to earn my keep now, not because I have to, but because I want to? His eyes softened. Then start with honey. Pour it how you like. She smiled faintly and reached for the jar. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first choice she'd made freely in years. That afternoon, she found herself sweeping again, this time humming quietly as she worked. When she stepped out to gather kindling, Corbin was chopping wood. He glanced at her and grinned. Dress looks better folded than dragging in the dirt. She smirked. Maybe I'll wear it again one day. Properly. He didn't push, just nodded. If that day comes, it'll be your call. She looked out across the snow-blanketed land and whispered, I think it already started. The snow had melted into slush by mid-afternoon, leaving muddy ruts in front of the cabin where Corbin had laid out hay to keep the path dry. Annabeth watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, unsure how to hold this strange comfort she'd never been taught to trust. He worked without his coat, sleeves rolled, forearms taut with motion as he lifted logs and split them with methodical grace. It wasn't just the strength that caught her breath. It was the silence, the lack of expectation in every swing of the axe. She stepped down and approached him slowly. Can I help? He didn't stop or smile, just handed her a smaller log and nodded toward the splitting block. She missed the first strike and winced, but he only said, You don't have to be perfect, just honest. She tried again. The crack rang true this time, splitting clean. She exhaled shakily. They always said I was no good, too thin, too quiet, too slow. He wiped his brow with the back of his arm and leaned on the axe. They lied. You're not broken. You were bought. That's different. She blinked hard. But if I was worth only $3, that's what they paid, not what you're worth. He said it with no drama, no pity, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. She nodded slowly, unable to meet his eyes. I thought when a man buys a woman, he owns her. I bought a lie, he replied. But you're a woman. You decide who you are now. She looked down at her hands, rough from days of work, but steadier than they'd ever been. And if I decide I want to be someone again? Corbin crouched to stack the wood. Then I'll stand beside you, not in front, not behind. She stepped closer. And if I can't forget what I've been through? He looked up. Then we remember it right. Not as shame, but proof you survived it. The wind picked up slightly, blowing strands of her hair across her cheek. She tucked them back with a shaky breath. You sound like someone who's been broken, too. He paused, then nodded once. I was. Once she didn't press, but he added quietly, My wife died 3 winters ago. I stopped talking to people, stopped caring, until the auction. Why me? She asked. Why did you bid? Corbin stood. Because you looked like you still had fight in your eyes, even after everything. She felt something collapse and rebuild in her chest all at once. That night, when the wind howled against the cabin and the fire burned low, Annabeth couldn't sleep. She stepped outside barefoot into the snow, staring up at the stars. Behind her, Corbin stepped out quietly and placed his coat over her shoulders without a word. They stood together in the cold, not touching, not speaking, just two people who had lost too much, standing still long enough to believe something might begin again. Annabeth was kneading bread dough when the wooden door creaked behind her, and she didn't flinch. Not this time. Her hands kept pressing the flour into shape as Corbin stepped in, arms full of dry kindling. He paused, watching her for a second longer than usual, then set the wood down gently beside the hearth. "You didn't jump," he said quietly. She blinked. "What?" He stepped closer, wiping snow from his boots. "Every time someone entered a room before, your shoulders would tense. Just now, they didn't." She looked down at her arms, then at the soft circle of dough under her palms. "I guess I forgot to be afraid." "That's not nothing," he said, and walked past her to check the kettle. The smell of herbs filled the small cabin, mixing with wood smoke and yeast. It was the scent of somewhere safe. Caleb was napping on the cot, one arm thrown above his head, breathing steady. Corbin stirred the pot, then motioned toward a wrapped bundle on the table. "I found something." Annabeth wiped her hands and approached slowly. Inside the cloth lay a comb, carved from bone, smoothed at the edges. "It's for you," he said. "If you want." Her fingers hovered over it. "I haven't brushed my hair in weeks." "Then let me help," he said. Her breath caught. He sat on the bench, and she turned her back, lowering herself between his knees. Silence filled the room, broken only by the crackling fire and Caleb's slow breathing. Corbin worked gently, pulling the comb through her tangled hair with reverent care. "I'm not pretty," she said softly. "I never have been." He paused. "You are, but not for the reason men usually mean." "Then why?" she asked. He gathered a section of her hair and began to braid it slowly, deliberately. "Because you stayed kind, even when the world didn't give you a reason to." Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Not yet. He tied off the braid with a scrap of blue ribbon. "There," he said, "royal enough for any woman who knows her own worth." She turned and looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who didn't need to own her to value her. A man who never raised his voice, who cooked when she was too tired, who listened more than he spoke, who watched her not with hunger, but with hope. "I used to think men like you didn't exist," she whispered. "I used to think women like you couldn't be real," he said. She reached up and touched the braid, now resting gently over her shoulder. "You're not going to kiss me, are you?" He smiled gently. "Not until you ask." She looked toward the cot where Caleb stirred slightly. "He calls you the quiet man, you know." "Good," Corbin replied. "It means he's listening." She nodded once, then turned back to the dough, her hands steadier, her shoulders straight. And for the first time in her life, when a man looked at her, she didn't wonder what he wanted. She knew what he saw. The snow had stopped falling by morning, leaving the world blanketed and hushed. Annabeth stepped out of the cabin with Caleb's small hand in hers, her braid falling over her shoulder like a badge. Corbin stood by the woodpile, chopping slow and steady, steam rising from his shirt as the sun began to stretch across the white fields. When he saw them, he didn't speak. He simply held out a mug of warm cider. She took it with a nod, and they sat together on the porch's edge, silent as the world warmed up around them. "I think we'll stay," she said softly. He glanced at her. "You already have." Caleb ran a stick through the snow, drawing lopsided suns and hearts, giggling when his mitten slipped off. Annabeth watched her son, then turned to Corbin. "Do you think he'll remember what happened? Before?" Children remember what gets repeated, he said. If we teach him kindness every day, that's what will live loudest. She looked down into her cider. No one ever taught me that? Then it starts now, he said. With you. Inside, the bread had risen perfectly, golden and light. Corbin broke off a piece, handed it to Caleb, then to her, and they stood around the hearth like it was a feast. She waited for someone to claim more, for someone to take the best piece and call it theirs, but no one did. I was taught to serve first, she murmured, even if I was starving. Not here, Corbin said. Here, we serve together, or not at all. Later, as dusk turned the snow to a soft, pink glow, Annabeth stepped out alone. She walked to the edge of the tree line, where she'd once planned to run. Where she'd whispered, "You can beat me after." Like that was the only currency she had. She knelt in the snow and pressed her fingers into the earth. Then she buried the last thing she'd been carrying. A small folded cloth, once part of the dress she was sold in. She didn't need it anymore. The cabin door creaked open behind her, but she didn't flinch. Corbin stood with Caleb asleep in his arms, the child's head resting trustingly on his shoulder. "You ready to come in?" he asked. She stood and walked toward him, past the trees, past the ghosts, past the girl she used to be. When she reached them, she didn't just take Caleb in her arms, she took the whole world back. And when Corbin opened the door, she stepped in like it had always been hers. No vows, no permission, no price, just love, quiet and strong, lit like the fire that warmed the home they now shared. She didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because of wonder. With Caleb curled up between the quilts and Corbin's deep, steady breathing from the other room, Annabeth sat by the fireplace, slowly running her fingers through her own hair. It was still damp from where he'd washed it hours earlier, kneeling like he was tending to something sacred. She'd never been touched like that. Not without wanting something back, not without ownership. But he hadn't claimed her. He'd honored her. The braid he'd made still held its shape, loose now, soft over her shoulder. She picked up a piece of pine from the basket and placed it into the fire. The flames caught slowly, like breath turning into voice. "Name it," Corbin had said before drifting to sleep, when she asked how they kept the hearth alive through every storm. "Every fire has a name. That way it listens." At first, she'd thought he was teasing, but he hadn't been. "Name it yourself," he'd whispered, "and it'll never forget what warmed you." Now, in the amber glow, she closed her eyes. Her name had been taken, used, sold, spoken in places that made her want to rip it from her own mouth, but here, alone with flame and silence, she whispered a new one. Not aloud, just inside. A name only the fire and her heart would know. And with that, something inside her finally laid down its sword. The door creaked slightly in the wind. She wrapped herself in the blanket Corbin had left folded by the chair and walked to the window. Outside, the trees swayed gently under the moonlight. She imagined the version of herself who had stepped off that auction cart. Eyes hollow, skin frozen, body braced for pain. She was gone, burned to ash in a fire that no longer demanded sacrifice. Behind her, Caleb stirred and whimpered. She was by his side in an instant, tucking the quilt higher, pressing her lips to his forehead. "We're safe," she whispered. "You're safe, baby." In his sleep, he murmured, "Mama." And her throat caught, not from sorrow, from joy. It had been months since he said it without hesitation. She sat there until morning, not needing sleep. Just warmth, just breathe, just a fire she had named herself. The morning sun painted the snow in gold, softening every edge of the world she thought she understood. Corbin was already outside, splitting logs with a rhythm that sounded less like labor and more like music. Annabeth stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him. Not because she was waiting for a sign, but because she finally knew she didn't need one. She stepped out barefoot, the snow no longer biting, just present, just real. He looked up, wiped his brow with the back of his hand, and said nothing. Neither did she. They didn't need words. She walked to him, took the next log, and placed it on the stump. When he handed her the axe, she smiled. It wasn't easy, but it was clean. The crack rang out like truth. Later, she made cornbread while Caleb pressed wildflowers into pages. Corbin watched from the porch, not as a protector, not as a rescuer, but as a man learning what it meant to stay. At midday, she packed the braid he had made, still tied with rawhide, and placed it in a carved box he had once kept for bullets. "For what?" he asked gently, wiping his hands. "For remembering," she said. "For knowing I wasn't broken before you touched my hair. Just waiting to be seen." That night Corbin took out the only suit he owned. It wasn't fancy, just clean, old, and carried a smell of pine and tobacco. He placed it near the hearth. "If you ever want me to ask you proper," he murmured, "I will." Annabeth touched the coat, then looked at him. "You already did, the moment you walked away after buying me." His jaw tightened. "That wasn't walking away." "I know," she said. "It was the first time a man didn't come closer by taking. You left. So I could choose." He lowered his head. Then, slowly, she reached out, took his hand, and placed it on her heart. "This is my answer," she whispered. "You're not my owner. You're my place to stand." When Caleb tugged at Corbin's sleeve that night, asking if they could build a snowman tomorrow, Corbin lifted him with one arm and said, "Only if your mama helps." Annabeth laughed, for real this time. No fear beneath it. The cabin didn't glow from candles or oil lamps that night. It glowed because 3 people sat by a fire they all helped build. And when the wind howled outside, the warmth didn't flicker. It deepened. Because this wasn't the story of a cowboy who bought a bride. It was the story of a cowboy who kneeled and walked away so that love could walk back in on its own 2 feet. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you'd seen her flinch when he kneeled, would you have understood what love really meant? Tell us in the comments.